Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Money and Me. And today I'm your host, Abhirag Bhattacharya, bringing a very special guest on our show. So, in the recent episodes, we've been bringing various founders, CEOs, and CFOs of crypto exchanges around the world, people who are literally defining and shaping the industry. But today we thought we'd do something different and get somebody who's connected blockchain technology with genomic data. Please welcome on the show David Koepsell. Hi, David.
Thank you. Very nice to be here.
So, David, how are you doing? Tell us, how has your schedule been recently?
Well, since I'm not traveling due to the pandemic, it's been a lot easier to actually conduct a lot of business online.
Right.
I hope you're well there.
Yep, doing good, fortunately. Hoping that things get better.
Good.
So before I start the interview, I really love the bookshelves behind you. I mean, there's a ton of books over there.
Well, when you're an academic, you tend to collect a lot of these things.
Right. My first question of the session deals exactly with that thought frame. So, David, you have had a very diverse career. You've been an advocate, you've been an author, you've also been a bioethicist and an educator for a very long time in your life. My question to you is, how has your perspective towards the ethical aspects of technology changed through the years?
So I think over the course of my various careers, especially as an educator, I have come to believe that there is a greater role for regulatory and governmental bodies in directing the trajectories of technologies and dealing with ethical matters. So I'd say that up until my 30s, I was a very staunch and idealistic, libertarian-minded person who thought all things could be solved by technology if we just let it. But having taught in ethics and engineering and doing a fair amount of writing in various areas of technologies and ethics, as well as with my background as a lawyer, I've come to see that there's actually a significant role for public policy, for dialogue in the public about matters of ethics and technology, and integration of those ideas into some sort of regulatory framework.
Right. So, what made you decide to shift or rather add on to your academic work and start your own company, EncrypGen? And
So,
secondly, if I
yeah,
may add, can you
sure.
also tell us if you personally find any elements of philosophy in blockchain technology?
If I find what?
Elements of philosophy in blockchain technology.
Oh, okay, sure. So I was, as you mentioned, a bioethicist. I still am, technically, but I used to teach a lot about matters of ownership and control of data, including the very famous case of Henrietta Lacks, whose cell lines I learned today now are responsible for a couple hundred or thousand tons of cells throughout the world. Her immortal cancer cells helped science greatly and helped society and in research and medical investigations and breakthroughs. And she was never paid anything for that. And I always felt, and my students always felt, that there was something unjust about that. She died in poverty, more or less. And only recently was her family compensated by the U.S. National Institute of Health. And taking that background in bioethics and with my co-founders and wife's interests as a scientist in genomics, being concerned with preventing that in the future, we decided, the best way to do this was to create something, to build something. I will talk later about why that might not be enough. We might also need some regulatory framework as well. But we decided we would create a system to be able to compensate people directly for their very valuable use of their data, their genomic data in science, and that's how I ended up in this world of crypto.
So that is pretty impressive by itself, the thought process that led you to create a company which actually benefited those who were giving their own genetic data for the betterment of science. But what amazes me even more is that you've managed to connect blockchain with it, which brings us to this conversation today. So how did
Sure.
you come up with this idea to create EncrypGen?
So I guess to answer the second part of your other question too, I am philosophically interested in the notion of blockchain because it solves some interesting problems philosophically, and that is gathering public consensus in a trustless way. So one of the issues that confronts us in democracy um, is having fair arbiters of public opinion and implementing public consensus in a way that's fair and just. That's an ongoing issue in politics. And blockchains are an attempt to try to solve that technologically and to create new forms of interaction that enable everybody to be able to participate in some way. So blockchains are really interesting philosophically for me as mechanisms for being able to use some sort of technology to exemplify some public consensus and to create things, to create decisions. In the case of Bitcoin, what it does is it allows us to make money, to create money, not make money. I mean, you can also make money if you're wise, but create money without the use of central authorities like banks or states. So the Ethereum blockchain is even more interesting to me because it also allows a computing layer, a Turing complete computing layer on which you can build all sorts of new processes. So for me, being able to implement a solution to the problem of that presented by the need for more genomic data and the lack of fair compensation for people for that data through a network with public consensus mechanisms was very compelling and remains to me very compelling for a solution of all sorts of similar issues, especially in science.
So I was researching on EncrypGen and I came across this very novel payment method you guys have come up with. So a DNA token, if I'm not wrong, a DNA token.
That's correct. Yeah. So we felt that in our marketplace, which is what our product is, it's a marketplace where people can go directly with their genomic data to the market, and researchers can come directly to that market. It's utterly decentralized and democratized, and people can buy and sell that data. It's de-identified and they can remain anonymous as well. And we felt it was very important for that marketplace to create a currency that was native to that marketplace, that could be the basis for the value of the data, that could reflect that value, we think, without intermediaries, and that people would, view as a valuable thing in itself, representative of the value of their DNA. We happen to also get the ticker DNA. Nobody had it at the time, so this was I think also a branding decision on our part. Because we think that's going to be the currency of the genomic internet that we're starting to build.
David, tell us about the alternative. So big corporations, so I was reading your blog and you were talking about how big corporations have sold genomic data for years because nobody really has any right over the data. So tell us about how these corporations actually end up selling this genomic data.
Right. So, one of the not so secret underlying reasons why everybody is encouraged to do these genomic tests is that data is extremely valuable for the companies that do those tests. They're not making a ton of money off of the tests themselves because there's a lot of expenses and logistics involved with shipping the test, doing, processing it, and revealing the data. So they make a lot of money through the resale of that data to researchers, primarily pharmaceutical companies, but other research organizations. And studies have shown that had people been paid directly for the value of the sales of their data, then the average user of one of these direct-to-consumer genetic testing companies would have been receiving about $200, something like $100 a year, maybe going forward, based on some of the deals that have happened. But that's significant money, and would have paid for the price of the test. So you're getting these tests at a discount, really, probably at a loss for those companies because they resell that data and keep that money themselves. And most people agree to that. So I get, I've done 23andMe myself, and I keep getting emails from them. Have your data used for science. Use your data for science. Help science. Well, that's good. I want to do that. But I know that through my platform that we've built, I can also get paid for that. So, and we think that's the alternative model that is just, that makes total sense, and that's going to be, the way marketplaces like that are going to have to exist in the future.
So data privacy is something that's been talked about more recently, especially since it's been found that big corporations sell off user data to advertising companies. And of course, the same case can be applied to genomic data, which happens to be even more important because it's very easy to differentiate between different human beings based just on the genomic data. So David, tell us, how important is it that a person is aware of the privacy of their own genomic data?
Yeah, so this has been underlined recently by a number of cases where, for instance, criminal suspects have been identified through genomic data uploaded by their relatives to various sites. Genomic data can tie a person to another person very clearly, and that's why those cases have been so important. These direct-to-consumer genetic tests can reveal a fair amount about you, and can be used to identify you in conjunction with other data. So you have to be aware that you're in these databases if you agree to, their policies, and that not just the genetic data, but the data that you've supplied, like the address where you had the kit sent, or your bank account, et cetera, all of that is in their hands. So all of that can reveal a lot about you, a lot more than you may wish to reveal about you. And that's why our marketplace is meant to be anonymous. You can sign up with just any old email you want. People sometimes just make up a new email if they don't want to be identified. And you upload just the data, and it's de-identified, so all the time markers are stripped out. And then you give as much information as you want for use in scientific searches. And you can give as little as you want as well. So we think it's important for people to start to take control of the privacy of their data. As you said earlier, there's no way you can own data right now. Anytime your personal data is out there, it's not yours. The only way to keep it safe is through secret keeping. But because we want to encourage scientific progress and we want that data used, we've tried to create a marketplace where you can remain anonymous, you can have that data used, you can be paid for it, and nobody's going to be able to figure out who you are unless there's significant new breakthroughs in technologies that we're working to help to prevent.
Right. Taking the conversation aside for a while and just focusing on genetics and research as we were talking about, do you think the day is close when we can actually treat diseases before they even come? For example, mental illnesses, diabetes are linked to genetics. So do you think the day is close that, when a child is born, for example, gene editing, which I believe has already been accomplished in China, not sure about the other countries, but do you think the day is close that that technology is commercially available to everyone?
The technology, the underlying technology is already available. People could do that, and if they have the know-how. Right now, there are significant ethical and scientific limitations One scientific limitation is we don't know the impact of even editing single nucleotide polymorphisms, a single letter in that 3 billion base pairs. We don't know the impact of that over time. So if you're changing a person's germline, those changes get passed on to the next generation. We don't know how evolution is going to deal with our intentional changes. So we're still looking into that experimentally. Ethically, we have similar concerns because the unintended consequences of our attempts at altering a germline gene is unknown at this point. And we need better certainty about it. For instance, in some tests with CRISPR, they found that attempts to edit are negated by natural processes. And this could be a problem, obviously, and it would suggest that we're not really yet aware of how these sort of edits can impact either that individual or that individual's offspring. But I do think over time we're going to get better certainty about it scientifically, and that will give us greater ethical certainty in being able to create more robust human beings, better agricultural products as well. I think it's a very important technology we're going to be able to perfect over time, but we're still very far away from that.
Since your background is ethics, what can you tell us about personally your views towards the ethical aspect of editing genes?
So, I mean, my only ethical concern is the question of uncertainty and the dangers or the risks that we are imposing on future generations who have no choice. I don't have any inherent problem with altering nature. We do it all the time. The whole world around us is the effect of our alteration. And being able to direct it in ways that are positive and good, would be really wonderful, because we could, help to curtail climate change. We could create better food stocks and help to avoid famine. We could eliminate diseases. All of that is good, and I think that we need to strive for that. So I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with altering nature. We've done that to get to where we are.
Right. Shifting the conversation back to crypto and blockchain, let's talk about NFTs. So the last 2 years have seen NFTs become very trendy, very popular. We see digital artworks and tweets being sold for enormous amounts of money, something that we could not have originally thought of.
Yeah.
So what do you see personally? What do you think as the future of NFTs? Do you think they are going to redefine what digital ownership means?
Not alone. They won't do so alone. And that's so this brings me back to the question of the role of regulation. Many people, I think, who are investing in the NFT market or building things in NFTs right now have a misconception that simply because you're giving somebody some sort of way to show a singular connection to a digital object, that you are giving them ownership of that object. And that's not true, because ownership is a legal phenomenon. It's defined by the law, and it's more than just possession. It's more than just exclusion of somebody else. Besides, the technology is not yet mature to the point where NFT can provide exclusive indicia of ownership. There have been some cases. Well, for instance, the Beeple artwork. There was a fellow who, a white hat hacker who, I forget his name. Anyway, he's created copies of it and tied through hacking the blockchain the ownership of that to Beeple himself. And if that's true, or if other similar tweaks are possible, then we haven't really perfected the technology yet. Digital objects are inherently copyable. They are the idea of it is wonderful. If you could create a unique digital object and provide assurance as to possession and control of that object by a single person, that would be phenomenal. But it still wouldn't give you ownership because, with the Beeple artwork, Beeple's sale of that didn't confer ownership of the underlying intellectual property. The copyright of that object is still Beeple's. So the person who bought it has a very limited range of things they can do with it. If they try to create another object out of it that's similar to it, people might be able to sue them for infringement of the copyright. Similar problems exist with attempts to try to create NFTs for instance, for genes. There's some projects out there that want to do that. But again, it doesn't give you ownership of anything because there's simply no way to own that data. You don't have a copyright on genetic data, and you can't get a copyright on it unless you write it yourself. So there's no framework, there's no legal framework for owning it. I think in order for us to confront realistically the potential, the great potentials NFTs promise, we need to also be aware of the law and regulations and try to confront the gaps in the law at the same time. So it's simply, it's disingenuous to claim that an NFT gives ownership of something. For instance, right now it could serve as an indicia of ownership, but it doesn't give ownership.
So you mentioned just a while back that genomic data is also being considered as NFTs. But then, correct me if I'm wrong, but genomic data is very large in size, isn't it?
It is, but that's not a insurmountable problem. It's a technical challenge.
Right. But then you do see that there is a possibility that this can happen in the future.
Yeah, so ideally, your genome would somehow be yours legally. We don't have a framework for that at all. But if that becomes the case, then I could see how an NFT might help you to take control of it, to be able to, share, parts of it, to portion out its use in various ways and to get paid for it at the same time.
That's a very crazy future, isn't it? Where everything has an ownership, may it be physical or digital. So physical ownership is something our laws have been able to regulate, but then digital ownership it's a conundrum which has been going on for quite a while. So you think it's possible? You think it's possible? NFTs can do that?
I think it's possible, sure. But again, we needed to have a realistic public policy debate about it and work with regulators and states to come up with a legal framework. Otherwise, we're just going to make these technical pledges that don't really fix anything.
Right. Okay, let's move on to something which is also equally important, and I've been wanting to ask you this. So the purpose of blockchain has always been to promote decentralized exchange of information. And science is something that's been gaining a lot of interest lately, right? Where science publication systems are deemed to be unnecessary at this age. And a lot of people are advocating that we don't need them in between. So what are your thoughts regarding that?
So for a long time, I've been a proponent of free and open science. About 15 years ago, I wrote a paper on Science Wiki, and I suggested that instead of standard publication, we would have this sort of growing science wiki where everybody contributes and peer review is ongoing like in Wikipedia, and over time, because that's how science actually works.
Right.
Okay, there's no settled, true theory of anything. There are better theories and worse theories, and theories that eventually get set aside. So this model, actually, this decentralized, disintermediated model that blockchains afford us would be an excellent addition or way actually to transition to a better mechanism for disseminating scientific knowledge, and ensuring the sort of peer testing and peer review that journals right now are kind of failing at for a variety of reasons, and that's a whole other hour-long topic that we could discuss.
So a real life scenario just happened yesterday. I was going through an article where the popular website scihub, if you might be knowing about it, is being threatened by multiple takeovers and legal takedowns. So scihub,
Yes.
for our listeners who are not aware of it, promotes unlimited access to research journals and academic papers, which are often limited to members of specific publications. So it opens up the opportunities for young researchers and students to access papers they otherwise could not have. Now, there is an ongoing movement online where people are requesting others to contribute their CPU resources to seed a torrent which is said to contain the entire archive of scihub. So, what are your thoughts about that?
Look, I'm very much in favor of that. So I think the bottling up and paywalling of publications in science, particularly, is adverse to the nature of science. So I think, but that's the model. And there's a number of reasons why I think the current scientific publishing model is unjust. And I say this as somebody who is on editorial boards and does editorial work for a number of journals right now. The publishers are the ones reaping the benefits. Scientists and young researchers are punished by the current system, and the distribution of the wealth, both of the information involved and the actual payments involved, is unfair. It's not working, and I think in a way that I would say was just. So I think all that science should be freely available. People who are researchers in small labs, I live in Mexico and my wife works for a government agency here. They can't pay for all the subscriptions. It's not a rich country. And this is a problem. So, I have library access through a wealthy American university. And so I can access all sorts of articles that, my wife, who's a scientist, and I'm just a philosopher, she can't access them. And I think that's wrong. And that hinders science, and it is in favor of the global north in a way that I think is going to hold back innovation elsewhere.
So, being an academician, you have seen how there's a growing trend of people shifting to decentralized services. Centralized authority is being debated over. It's being people are wanting a change where they are in control of not only just their data, but data other people want to share, as in the case of scihub, but also cryptocurrencies. So since last year, the crypto market has seen a tremendous boom. 10 years back, maybe perhaps none of us could have imagined the impact that it is generating today. Today, hundreds of US banks are considering shifting to Bitcoin trading. And a lot of financial giants like PayPal, Visa have already started advocating the use of crypto payments. But the entire point of cryptocurrencies was a decentralized service. But we see centralized institutions coming in and trying to control it. So, what are your thoughts about that?
Again, I think we need to fight that. We've been fighting it as a company in our own ways. There's always this pressure to go with big central exchanges. But it suits us more philosophically to be on things like Uniswap and other decentralized sites, and sites that like CoinMetro were listed that agree with us about the democratization of cryptocurrency and that it being a core value. We're working with partners, for instance, in Africa. Indigenous AI is a partner we're working with in Africa and Kenya. And their customers are going to be Kenyans. And the availability of these big centralized institutions in places like that is iffy. It's not dependable. It's not necessarily ideal either. because the pricing and the KYC and AML that they have to go through for that might be burdensome. So in general, I think as advocates of the crypto mentality, we want to see a democratization and decentralization, and fighting against these centralization tendencies that large, big capital wants to seek. And I think that tension is there right now, and we see with the rise of things like Uniswap that people are concerned and interested in supporting that vision. Of course, Ethereum's fees right now are prohibitive in some cases, but we think that'll be solved by the next Ethereum.
But don't you think there is a technical bridge that divides a lot of people from truly accepting crypto and blockchain technology? For example, Uniswap, in order to purchase any tokens in the Uniswap line, it's far more complicated process than just creating an account with your big exchange and just buying some tokens in return of fiat. So what do you think? How can we solve that bridge? How can we cross it?
So there's actually opportunities there for companies that want to create tools that work more friendly ways with Uniswap. There's no, Uniswap has an open API. We can build all sorts of new front ends to it. It's an opportunity, and I think that you're going to see from that opportunity all sorts of new products emerge. But we also have a educational barrier, and we should be, as crypto advocates, helping to teach people how to use these tools. My mom's in her 70s, and I've just taught her how to use crypto, and she's very excited by it. I think we need to do that and be patient. There's also, unfortunately, in the crypto world, this tendency to label newcomers noobs, and sort of scoff at their attempts to learn. But there's also a lot of really supportive people who are happy to introduce people to the technology. And I think we should encourage that. We should really embrace new users and help to make things more accessible and easier to use, and educate them about it, both philosophically and technically.
So David, the last question of this interview is reserved for any comments you might have or anything you want to share with us about your future projects, future plans, ideas that you might have had, but now you feel it's a good time to return to them.
Sure. So, I've been working recently to reframe the discussion about data, because we tend to think of it in terms of privacy or property. And I've already talked about why property doesn't work. Privacy is also a weird concept, which is very modern, and it's not universally shared. So I've been promoting the idea of data sustainability. So I think by taking some of the notions of sustainability, viewing data as a resource, and using some of the language and notions of sustainability in the climate context, we can create an ecosystem for data that is more nurturing of that data, less likely to ruin that resource, and better able to distribute in a just way the value of those resources. So I created a website, and I'm going to be working on incorporating these notions into my talks and our products over time. It's datasustainability.org, and I'm looking for people who want to help us to define these concepts and introduce that as a sort of a third way to try to promote values in the use of data.
Right, David, that sounds like a very interesting project, and I wish you all the best. I'll be looking forward to it.
Thanks.
Before ending the interview, a last informal question, but which is your favorite cryptocurrency?
Well, okay, so I think Ethereum, because Ethereum, besides DNA, of course, the Ethereum network does something phenomenal by adding this, the possibility to build Web 3.0. It's a Turing complete system, which is, if you think about it, remarkable. You could build entire new types of businesses and social interactions on it. It's a great platform, and it allows us to do business with our token DNA.
So are you already in the Ethereum blockchain, or are you planning to migrate into it?
We have our token is exchangeable in the Ethereum blockchain. So when you cash out your DNA from our platform, you get a Ethereum-based ERC20 token, which you can buy and sell.
Splendid. Well, David, it was great having you for this chat. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.